History is not merely written in the blood of warriors, but in the quiet ink of marriage contracts. Across the misty landscapes of ancient Britain, the union of two royal houses often held the power to forge empires or dismantle dynasties. These were the queens whose vows were more than romantic promises. They were strategic maneuvers on a continental chessboard. In an era of shifting borders and uncertain loyalties, a queen's dowry could include entire provinces, and her lineage could dictate the legitimacy of kings. We begin our journey looking through the lens of time at the women who wielded the power of the altar to reshape the world. Our story begins with Eleanor of Aquitaine, perhaps the most formidable woman of the Middle Ages. Inheriting the vast, wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine, she became the most sought-after bride in Europe. Her first marriage to Louis VII of France was intended to consolidate the French crown's power, bringing the lush lands of the south under the influence of Paris. However, the union was fraught with cultural clashes and personal coldness. Eleanor was a woman of intellect and spirit, stifled by the ascetic court of her pious husband, as the shadows of political instability began to loom over their fragile domestic peace. The marriage between Eleanor and Louis VII reached its breaking point during the Second Crusade. Eleanor, accompanying her husband to the Holy Land, found herself at odds with his indecisive leadership and the restrictive nature of his court. The journey through the sun-scorched landscapes of the East only served to widen the chasm between them. Rumors of infidelity and political disagreements over military strategy poisoned their relationship. As they returned to Europe, the realization dawned that this union, meant to unite France, was crumbling, setting the stage for a divorce that would change the map of Europe forever. In 1152, the marriage was officially annulled on the grounds of consanguinity. While Louis may have felt relief to be rid of a headstrong wife who had failed to produce a male heir, he underestimated the consequences. By the laws of the time, the annulment meant that Eleanor's vast territories of Aquitaine, Poitou, and Gascony were returned to her. In a single legal stroke, the French king lost half of his kingdom's influence. Eleanor, now a free agent and the most powerful duchess in Europe, immediately turned her eyes toward a new, more promising alliance across the English Channel. Within months of her annulment from the French king, Eleanor did the unthinkable. She married the young and ambitious Henry Plantagenet, Count of Anjou and Duke of Normandy. This union was a masterstroke of geopolitical strategy. By marrying Henry, Eleanor transferred her vast territories of Aquitaine to the English crown, effectively stripping the French king of his most valuable lands. This was not just a marriage of passion, but a declaration of war through diplomacy. Henry, soon to be Henry II of England, now controlled more of France than the French king himself, birthing the Angevin Empire. The coronation of Henry and Eleanor as King and Queen of England marked the beginning of a new era. This union created a powerhouse that stretched from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees. For the first time, the English crown held significant continental power, a fact that would lead to centuries of conflict between England and France. Eleanor was no mere consort. She was a regent, a patron of the arts, and a political mastermind who governed England while Henry was away. Her marriage had effectively moved the center of European power from Paris to the heart of London. However, the power of this marriage eventually turned inward, leading to one of history's most famous domestic feuds. As Henry's sons grew older, Eleanor supported their rebellions against their father, seeking to protect her own interests and her children's inheritance. This led to her long imprisonment by Henry, a period of isolation that lasted 16 years. Even from behind castle walls, her influence persisted. Upon Henry's death, she emerged not as a defeated widow, but as the Queen Mother, securing the throne for her sons Richard the Lionheart and later King John, ensuring the Plantagenet line remained unbroken. The tradition of strategic marriage continued to shape Britain, as seen in the life of Margaret of Scotland. A Saxon princess fleeing the Norman conquest, she sought refuge in Scotland and eventually married King Malcolm III. This was more than a union of hearts. It was a union of cultures. Margaret brought the refined traditions of the Saxon court and the Roman Church to the rugged northern kingdom. Her marriage acted as a bridge between the old Anglo-Saxon world and the rising Norman influence, fundamentally civilizing the Scottish court and altering the religious landscape of the entire island. Margaret's marriage ensured that the bloodline of the ancient Saxon kings would survive. Her daughter, Matilda, eventually married Henry I of England, the son of William the Conqueror. This masterfully orchestrated union finally reconciled the bitter divide between the displaced Saxons and the ruling Normans. By merging these two rival lineages, Margaret's marriage laid the foundation for a unified English identity. Her influence was so profound that she was eventually canonized as a saint, her legacy living on through the kings and queens who would define Britain for the next millennium as a blend of two worlds. Centuries later, Isabella of France, known as the She-Wolf, was married to Edward II to solidify peace between England and France. However, the marriage was a disaster, as Edward favored his court companions over his queen. Isabella, humiliated and sidelined, eventually used her position to orchestrate a daring coup. By forging an alliance with Roger Mortimer, she gathered an army and returned to England, not as a submissive wife, but as a conqueror. Her marriage had provided her the claim and the connections needed to overthrow a king, fundamentally altering the succession and the power of the English monarchy. Following the tumultuous reign of Edward II, the English crown again found itself entangled in a marriage of political necessity. Margaret of Anjou, a fierce and intelligent French noblewoman, was wed to the pious but weak Henry VI. Unlike previous queens who remained in the shadows, Margaret was thrust into the spotlight of the Wars of the Roses. Her marriage was intended to secure peace between France and England, but instead, it became the catalyst for a dynastic struggle. As Henry's mental health deteriorated, Margaret assumed the mantle of leadership, fighting relentlessly to protect her son's inheritance against the rising tide of the Yorkist faction. Margaret's influence was not confined to the court. She became the heart of the Lancastrian cause. When her husband was captured, she fled to the north and then to Scotland, using her marriage ties and her French heritage to raise foreign armies. To her enemies, she was a she-wolf, even more formidable than Isabella. To her supporters, she was the only pillar holding up a crumbling dynasty. Her marriage had transformed her from a foreign princess into a hardened general, demonstrating that a queen's primary duty was often to defend the crown when the king himself could not. The bloody cycle of the Wars of the Roses finally found a resolution through a strategic union that redefined the English monarchy. Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV, was married to Henry Tudor, the victor of Bosworth Field. This marriage was a masterstroke of political pragmatism, uniting the warring houses of York and Lancaster. By marrying Elizabeth, Henry VII sought to legitimize his tenuous claim and bring stability to a fractured realm. Elizabeth's role was symbolic, yet vital. Her presence on the throne alongside Henry signaled the birth of the Tudor dynasty and the end of decades of civil strife. The Tudor line was further solidified by a marriage that would eventually tear the Western world apart. Catherine of Aragon, daughter of the powerful Spanish monarchs Isabella and Ferdinand, was married to Henry VII's son, Arthur, and later to his brother, Henry VIII. This alliance with Spain was meant to protect England's interests against France. Catherine was a model of piety and intellect, deeply loved by the English people. However, when she failed to provide a male heir, her marriage became the center of a legal and religious firestorm. The great matter would lead to the English Reformation, forever altering the nation's spiritual landscape. In a moment of unprecedented defiance, Catherine of Aragon stood before the Blackfriars court to defend the validity of her marriage. Refusing to accept an annulment, she appealed directly to the Pope and her powerful nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor. Her marriage was no longer just a personal bond. It was the focal point of a geopolitical struggle between England, Rome, and the Habsburg Empire. Catherine's refusal to yield forced Henry VIII to break from the Catholic Church, creating the Church of England. This single marriage, and its subsequent collapse, became the most consequential divorce in history, sparking centuries of religious conflict and reform. Catherine's daughter, Mary I, sought to undo her father's religious revolution through her own marriage. She wed Philip II of Spain, a union that was deeply unpopular among the English people who feared foreign domination. This marriage was intended to return England to the Catholic fold and secure a powerful ally on the continent. However, it also sparked rebellions and fueled the growing flames of nationalism. Mary's devotion to her husband and her faith defined her short, tumultuous reign. While the marriage failed to produce an heir, it underscored the immense power a queen's choice of husband held over the nation's identity and international standing. North of the border, the life of Mary, Queen of Scots, was defined and ultimately destroyed by her marriages. Her first marriage to the French Dauphin made her Queen of France, briefly uniting the two crowns. After his death, her subsequent marriages to Lord Darnley and the Earl of Bothwell were mired in scandal and political intrigue. These unions were not just personal choices. They were moves in a high-stakes game for the thrones of both Scotland and England. Her marriages alienated her nobility and eventually led to her imprisonment and execution by her cousin, Elizabeth I, highlighting the deadly intersection of marriage, religion, and sovereign power. Turning back the clock to the 12th century, Eleanor of Aquitaine remains one of the most influential queens in history. Her marriage to Henry II of England created the vast Angevin Empire, stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. Eleanor was no mere consort. She was a duchess in her own right, bringing the immense wealth and lands of Aquitaine to the English crown. Her marriage was a volatile partnership of equals that shaped the borders of Europe for centuries. When the marriage soured, Eleanor's influence did not wane. She incited her sons to rebel against their father, proving that a queen's political agency could survive even the most bitter marital discord. For 15 years, Henry II kept Eleanor imprisoned to curb her political meddling. Yet, upon his death, she emerged to act as regent for her son, Richard the Lionheart. Her marriage had given her the status and the network required to govern England during Richard's absence on the Crusades. She negotiated ransoms, suppressed revolts, and secured the succession for her younger son, John. Eleanor's life demonstrated that a royal marriage was often a long-term strategic investment. Even after the romantic bond was severed, the legal and territorial consequences of her union continued to dictate the fate of the English and French monarchies. Centuries later, the marriage of Henrietta Maria of France to Charles I of England again showcased how a queen's background could trigger national upheaval. As a Catholic princess in a staunchly Protestant country, her marriage was viewed with deep suspicion. Her influence over Charles and her efforts to secure Catholic aid during the English Civil War made her a target for parliamentary ire. Like the queens before her, Henrietta Maria found that her marriage made her a central figure in a conflict that would eventually lead to the execution of a king and the temporary abolition of the monarchy. proving that royal unions remained the pivot of history. Following the restoration of the monarchy, the marriage of Charles II to Catherine of Braganza in 1662 signaled a monumental shift in England's global ambitions. Catherine, a Portuguese infanta, arrived with a dowry that would redefine the British Empire: the strategic ports of Tangier and Mumbai. This union directed England's focus away from internal religious wars and toward maritime dominance. Despite facing isolation as a Catholic in a Protestant court and the heartbreak of failing to produce an heir, Catherine's presence introduced global luxuries like tea, subtly reshaping the cultural and economic fabric of the nation for centuries to come. The marriage of Mary II to William of Orange was perhaps the most consequential political union in British history. In 1688, this alliance served as the catalyst for the Glorious Revolution, a bloodless coup that overthrew her father, James II. By marrying the Dutch stadtholder, Mary secured the Protestant succession and redefined the monarchy's power. Together, they signed the Bill of Rights, establishing a constitutional monarchy where the crown was subject to Parliament. This marriage transitioned England from the era of absolute divine right into a modern, regulated state, forever changing the relationship between the sovereign and the people. Queen Anne's marriage to Prince George of Denmark was a quiet, stable union that anchored her during a period of immense national transformation. Though she faced the personal tragedy of losing all 17 of her children, her reign saw the 1707 Acts of Union, which merged the kingdoms of England and Scotland into Great Britain. Anne utilized her domestic stability to navigate the intense political rivalries of the Whigs and Tories. Through her marriage and her subsequent solo rule, she oversaw the rise of the British Empire as a preeminent European power, proving that even a grieving queen could forge a unified nation. The shift to the House of Hanover was rooted in the strategic marriage of Sophia of the Palatinate to Ernest Augustus. As the granddaughter of James I, Sophia was named the heir to the British throne by the Act of Settlement in 1701 to ensure a Protestant succession. Although she died just weeks before she would have become queen, her marriage and her lineage brought George I to the throne. This union imported a German dynasty to Britain, fundamentally altering the nation's foreign policy and entangling British interests with European continental politics for the next century, marking the birth of a new era. Caroline of Ansbach, wife of George II, was one of the most intellectually gifted queens in British history. Her marriage was a true political partnership. She acted as a bridge between the king and his prime minister, Robert Walpole. Caroline's influence was instrumental in maintaining the stability of the Hanoverian dynasty during its early, uncertain years. She championed Enlightenment thinkers and navigated the treacherous waters of court intrigue with a sharp mind. Through her marriage, she ensured that the monarchy remained relevant in an age of reason, exercising power from behind the throne to shape the political landscape of 18th century Britain. Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz married George III and became a symbol of domestic stability during a time of global upheaval. As the British Empire grappled with the American Revolution and the onset of the Industrial Age, Charlotte provided a steadying presence at court. Her marriage brought a new focus on culture, botany, and the arts, but it was also marked by the king's descent into mental illness. Charlotte's role shifted from companion to protector of the crown's dignity. Her resilience during her husband's bouts of madness kept the royal family unified, preventing a total collapse of the monarchy's image during a century of revolution. The marriage of Queen Victoria to Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in 1840 redefined the British monarchy for the modern age. Far from being a mere ceremonial union, Albert became Victoria's closest advisor and the de facto co-regent. Together, they navigated the Industrial Revolution, the rise of the British Empire to its zenith, and the Great Exhibition of 1851. Their partnership transformed the royal family into a model of Victorian morality and domesticity. Albert's influence pushed Britain toward technological and social progress, proving that a royal marriage could be the engine of national modernization and cultural identity. As the grandmother of Europe, Queen Victoria used the marriages of her 9 children to weave a web of influence across the entire continent. By marrying her offspring into the royal houses of Germany, Russia, Spain, and beyond, she sought to maintain a balance of power and ensure peace through family ties. However, this dynastic engineering was a double-edged sword. While it expanded British influence, it also interconnected the fates of European nations so deeply that personal family squabbles could escalate into national crises. Her marriage to Albert had created a dynasty that would eventually dominate and then struggle to survive. The shifting political tides of Europe. The marriage of Victoria's granddaughter, Alex of Hesse, to Tsar Nicholas II of Russia illustrates the tragic end of dynastic influence. Known as Alexandra Fyodorovna, her union was intended to bring Britain and Russia closer, but it instead isolated the Russian monarchy. Her devotion to her husband and her desperate search for a cure for their son's hemophilia led her to the mystic Rasputin, further alienating the Russian people. This marriage, a direct result of Victoria's matchmaking, became a focal point for the Russian Revolution. It demonstrated how royal unions, once the primary tool of diplomacy, could also lead to the violent collapse of centuries-old empires. By the dawn of the 20th century, the era of queens changing history through strategic marriage reached its twilight. The very alliances Victoria had carefully constructed through her children's unions were tested by the fires of World War I. The War of the Cousins saw the monarchs of Britain, Germany, and Russia, all related by blood and marriage, pitted against one another. This collapse of the old order proved that personal ties could no longer restrain the forces of nationalism and industrial warfare. The long history of royal marriages as the pivot of global destiny concluded, leaving behind a world reshaped by their legacies and their failures. As the dust of World War I settled, the landscape of European monarchy was forever altered. The intricate web of marriages that once promised peace had instead created a chain reaction of conflict. Yet, in the heart of Britain, the institution endured by adapting. The marriage of the future King George VI to Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon marked a departure from the tradition of continental royal matches. This union with a British aristocrat, rather than a foreign princess, signaled a shift toward national unity over dynastic expansion, reinforcing the monarchy's bond with its own people during a time of global upheaval and uncertainty. In 1947, a young Princess Elizabeth married Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, a union that mirrored the ancient alliances of the past while looking toward an uncertain future. This marriage was one of the last great dynastic links, yet it occurred in a world where royal power was increasingly symbolic. Philip, a naval officer, brought a modern sensibility to the ancient House of Windsor. Their union provided a sense of continuity and stability for a nation rebuilding after the devastation of World War II, proving that even as political power waned, the influence of a royal marriage remained a potent cultural force. Behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, the mystery of the royal marriage evolved into a matter of state image and national identity. The Queen and her consort became the faces of a changing Britain. No longer were marriages used to annex territories or form military pacts. Instead, they were tools of diplomacy and public morale. The serious documentary tone of this era reflects a shift toward the mystique of the crown, a carefully guarded image that blended ancient tradition with the demands of a modern world, where every gesture was scrutinized for historical meaning and its impact on the Commonwealth's unity. The corridors of power in Westminster still whispered with the secrets of centuries past. Even in the modern era, the ghosts of medieval queens like Matilda and Eleanor of Aquitaine haunted the halls through their enduring legal and social legacies. The ancient British royal mystery lies in how these unions, often forced and fraught with tension, laid the groundwork for the modern state. The parchment texture of history records these tales not just as personal stories, but as the very blueprint of the nation's survival and its enduring legal frameworks, showing how marriage was once the ultimate political weapon of the state. Examining the archives reveals the heavy price paid by these women. Many queens were essentially political hostages, their bodies and lives traded for peace or land. Their marriages were never private affairs. They were public contracts signed with heavy seals and bloodless diplomacy. These women navigated a treacherous landscape where a lack of an heir could lead to ruin, and a surplus of ambition could lead to the tower. Their resilience remains a central theme in the serious historical narrative of Britain, as they transformed their domestic cages into platforms for unprecedented political influence and survival. The Royal Marriages Act of 1772 served as a stark reminder of the control the state exerted over the hearts of its rulers. This legislation, born from the king's desire to maintain the purity and political utility of the royal bloodline, ensured that love would always be secondary to the needs of the crown. The graphic novel style of this historical period highlights the tension between personal desire and dynastic duty. Each signature on a marriage contract was a tether to the past, a commitment to keep the machinery of the monarchy turning, regardless of the individual cost or the changing social landscape. As we look closer at the portraits of these historical figures, the semi-realistic characters reveal the weariness of their roles. A queen's duty through marriage extended beyond the wedding day. It was a lifelong performance of stability. In the muted colors of the 20th century, we see the shift from the vibrant, gold-leafed authority of the Tudors to the somber, gray-toned responsibilities of the modern era. The high detail in their expressions tells a story of stoicism and sacrifice, as they balanced the weight of the crown with the evolving expectations of a democratic society that still craved royal tradition. The influence of a consort often operated in the shadows, yet it was no less impactful. Prince Philip's role in modernizing the monarchy while maintaining its ancient dignity mirrored the roles of past consorts, who had to navigate the fine line between power and support. This dynamic is a recurring theme in the history of royal marriages. Whether it was Prince Albert's influence on Victorian industry or Philip's focus on technology, these unions brought external perspectives into the heart of the palace, slowly evolving the institution from within through subtle, persistent pressure and the unique vantage point of the royal spouse. The architecture of the royal residences serves as a silent witness to these unfolding dramas. From the cold stones of Windsor to the ornate halls of St. James, each room has hosted the negotiations, celebrations, and tragedies of royal unions. The dramatic lighting of these spaces often conceals as much as it reveals, echoing the hidden nature of royal life. In the documentary tone of our exploration, these buildings are characters themselves, bastions of a bygone era that continue to house the living legacy of queens who changed history through the simple yet profound act of marriage and alliance. As this chapter of history draws to a close, we see that the legacy of these queens is not found in the wars they stopped or started, but in the map of the world itself. The boundaries of nations, the laws of succession, and the cultural identities of entire peoples were forged in the fires of these unions. The serious, muted colors of our final assessment reflect a world that has moved past the era of dynastic diplomacy, yet remains deeply shaped by its echoes. The history of royal marriage is the history of power, sacrifice, and the enduring mystery of the crown. In the 12th century, the political landscape of Europe was redrawn by a single audacious union. Eleanor of Aquitaine, having dissolved her marriage to the French king, turned her eyes toward the ambitious Henry Plantagenet. This was no mere romance. It was a calculated merger of vast territories. By marrying the future King Henry II of England, Eleanor brought with her the sprawling Duchy of Aquitaine, effectively making the English monarch more powerful on French soil than the French king himself. This marriage laid the foundations for the Angevin Empire, a massive cross-channel domain that would dictate the geopolitical struggles of the Middle Ages. The union of Henry and Eleanor was a partnership of equals in intellect and ambition, yet it was fraught with the very tensions that come from shared power. As Eleanor managed her own lands while influencing the English court, the complexities of their marriage began to manifest in their many children. These sons, including the future Richard the Lionheart and King John, were raised in the shadow of a crown that was contested even within the family. The marriage became a double-edged sword. It provided the wealth and land to build an empire, but it also sowed the seeds of civil war and rebellion that would plague the Plantagenet line for generations. As the years passed, the marriage of Eleanor and Henry soured, leading to Eleanor's imprisonment. Yet even from behind castle walls, her influence remained a potent force in British history. She survived her husband and played a pivotal role in securing the throne for her sons. Her marriage had fundamentally altered the relationship between the crowns of England and France, creating a centuries-long rivalry. The borders of Aquitaine, brought to the English crown through her dowry, remained a point of contention that would eventually ignite the 100 Years' War. Eleanor's legacy is a testament to how a queen's marital alliance could define the destiny of nations. Moving forward into the 14th century, we encounter Isabella of France, whose marriage to Edward II was intended to secure peace between two warring kingdoms. Known to history as the She-Wolf, Isabella found herself trapped in a marriage defined by neglect and political incompetence. Her husband's reliance on favorites alienated both his wife and his nobility. Isabella, however, was not a woman to be silenced. Her French heritage and the connections she maintained with her homeland provided her with the leverage needed to challenge her husband's rule. This marriage, originally meant to foster harmony, instead became the catalyst for one of the most dramatic coups in English history. Isabella's eventual rebellion against Edward II, alongside her ally Roger Mortimer, led to the first-ever deposition of an English king. Through her marriage and subsequent actions, she ensured that her son, Edward III, would take the throne, marking a new era of English military might. This transition of power was a direct consequence of the breakdown of a royal marriage. The political fallout redefined the role of the queen consort from a passive domestic figure to a potential political powerhouse. The shadow of Isabella's reign lingered over the monarchy, serving as a reminder of the danger inherent in a marriage where the queen's power is underestimated. In the aftermath of the 100 Years' War, the marriage of Catherine of Valois to Henry V was designed to unify the crowns of England and France once and for all. Following the Treaty of Troyes, Henry was recognized as the heir to the French throne, with Catherine serving as the bridge between the two dynasties. This union was the pinnacle of English ambition in France, promising a future of a dual monarchy. However, the early death of Henry V left Catherine as a young widow with an infant king. Her marriage had created a vision of a unified empire that was as fragile as it was grand, setting the stage for further dynastic instability. The legacy of Catherine of Valois did not end with Henry V. Her secret relationship and subsequent marriage to Owen Tudor laid the groundwork for a new dynasty that would eventually claim the English throne. This clandestine union, born out of the ruins of her first marriage, was a personal choice that would have monumental historical consequences. It was through Catherine that the Tudor bloodline entered the English royal family tree, eventually leading to the end of the Middle Ages in Britain. Her story highlights how the private lives of queens, often hidden in the shadows of official records, can steer the course of history in unexpected directions. As the Wars of the Roses tore England apart, the marriage of Margaret of Anjou to Henry VI became a focal point of the conflict. Margaret was a fierce defender of her husband's crown and her son's inheritance, often taking the lead when the king's health failed. Her French origin and her uncompromising nature made her a polarizing figure, yet she was the glue that held the Lancastrian cause together. Her marriage was not just a domestic arrangement, but a military alliance that sustained a decades-long civil war. Margaret's tenacity in the face of defeat demonstrated the lengths to which a queen would go to protect the dynastic interests forged through her marriage. The long-standing conflict between the houses of York and Lancaster was finally resolved through a marriage that symbolized the birth of modern England. Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV, was married to Henry VII, the first Tudor king. This union was a calculated political move to unite the White Rose and the Red Rose, ending the Wars of the Roses and legitimizing Henry's claim to the throne. Elizabeth's role as the bridge between two warring factions was crucial for the stability of the realm. Her marriage transformed her from a pawn of war into the mother of a dynasty that would define the English Renaissance. With the Tudor dynasty firmly established, the history of royal marriage entered a new era of statecraft. The union of Elizabeth of York and Henry VII was more than a conclusion to civil war. It was the blueprint for how the British monarchy would navigate the coming centuries. The strategic use of marriage would continue to be the primary tool for expanding influence and securing peace. But the precedents set by these medieval queens remained the foundation. As we look back at these unions, we see that the crown was never just a symbol of power, but a heavy burden carried by those whose personal lives were the very fabric of national history. As the 16th century dawned, the focus of royal marriage shifted from domestic peace to international dominance. Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella, arrived on English shores, carrying the weight of a powerful European alliance. Her marriage to Prince Arthur was designed to unite the rising power of England with the vast Spanish Empire, creating a formidable Catholic bloc. This union was more than a romantic endeavor. It was a cold, calculated move of geopolitical chess. The young princess brought with her the sophisticated culture of the Spanish court, forever altering the English cultural and political landscape. Tragedy struck early when Prince Arthur died, leaving the Spanish alliance in jeopardy. In a move that would redefine the English church and monarchy, a papal dispensation was sought to allow Catherine to marry Arthur's younger brother, the future Henry VIII. This pivotal decision, rooted in the desire to keep Catherine's massive dowry and the Spanish friendship, set the stage for decades of religious and political upheaval. The young Henry, vibrant and ambitious, saw in Catherine a partner who embodied the prestige of old Europe. Their early years together were marked by a shared vision of a grand Renaissance monarchy. Catherine of Aragon proved herself to be more than just a consort. She was a capable statesman and regent. While Henry VIII was away campaigning in France, Catherine oversaw the defense of England against the invading Scots. Her leadership culminated in the Battle of Flodden, a decisive English victory. Clad in armor over her regal gown, she addressed the troops, proving that a queen's influence extended far beyond the domestic sphere. Her success as regent cemented her popularity among the English people, who saw her as a steadfast protector of the realm during her husband's frequent absences. The stability of the Tudor marriage began to crumble under the pressure of the succession. Despite multiple pregnancies, only one child, Mary, survived infancy. Henry's obsession with a male heir turned his devotion into desperation, leading him to question the validity of his marriage to his brother's widow. This king's great matter became a legal and theological battlefield that pitted the English crown against the Vatican. Catherine, fiercely devout and resolute, refused to accept an annulment, defending her status as Henry's true wife and her daughter's legitimacy with a tenacity that shook the foundations of the European social order. In the shadows of the court, a new force emerged: Anne Boleyn. Her marriage to Henry VIII was not merely a romantic pursuit, but a revolutionary act that severed England's ties with the Roman Catholic Church. By making himself the head of the Church of England to facilitate this union, Henry transformed the nature of royal power forever. Anne was a catalyst for the English Reformation, her intellect and ambition driving the king to dismantle ancient institutions. This marriage was a declaration of independence, yet it placed Anne at the center of a swirling vortex of religious and political animosity. Anne Boleyn's failure to provide the promised son led to a swift and brutal downfall, highlighting the perilous nature of royal marriage in the Tudor age. Her successor, Jane Seymour, was marketed as the antithesis to Anne's fiery nature: submissive, quiet, and traditional. Jane's primary legacy was the birth of the long-awaited male heir, Edward VI, but the cost was her life. Her death shortly after childbirth left Henry in a state of genuine mourning, and the kingdom with a fragile future. This brief union underscored the brutal reality that a queen's value was often measured solely by the heirs she produced. The search for a fourth wife led Henry VIII toward the Protestant princes of Germany. The marriage to Anne of Cleves was a purely diplomatic arrangement, intended to secure a northern alliance against the Catholic powers of France and Spain. However, the union was famously doomed by a lack of personal chemistry, as Henry found the reality of his bride did not match the portrait painted by Hans Holbein. Though the marriage was quickly annulled, Anne's survival and her subsequent status as the king's beloved sister showcased a different kind of success, navigating the treacherous Tudor court with grace and emerging with her life. The brief and tragic marriage to Catherine Howard illustrated the volatile nature of the king's late-life whims. A teenager thrust into the arms of an aging, paranoid monarch, Catherine was a pawn for the powerful Howard family. Her past indiscretions and her search for affection outside the royal marriage bed led to a charge of high treason. Her execution served as a grim reminder that in the Tudor era, the bedchamber was a political minefield. The crown was a heavy burden that could easily crush those who did not understand the gravity of their position within the national narrative. Henry's final marriage to Catherine Parr brought a rare period of stability and intellectual growth to the court. A twice-widowed scholar, Catherine was more of a companion and nurse than a romantic interest. She was the first woman in England to publish a book under her own name, and her influence was instrumental in the education of Henry's children, particularly the future Elizabeth I. Her ability to navigate Henry's volatile temper while championing Protestant reform showed a sophisticated understanding of power. Through this marriage, she ensured that the legacy of the Tudor queens would be one of intellect as much as lineage. As the Tudor era progressed, the daughters of these complex marriages, Mary and Elizabeth, would take the throne themselves, forever changing the concept of female rule. The strategic marriages of their father and the resilience of their mothers provided the blueprint for their own reigns. Mary would seek a Spanish union to restore the old faith, while Elizabeth would famously use her single status as a diplomatic shield. The crown remained a symbol of power and a heavy burden, but the precedent set by the queens who came before them had turned royal marriage into the ultimate tool of national identity and survival. Elizabeth I's refusal to marry was a masterclass in political maneuvering, yet the question of succession haunted her final days. Her death marked the end of the Tudor line, but the fruit of an earlier strategic marriage, that of Margaret Tudor to James IV of Scotland, bore a new branch. The crown would pass to Mary Stuart's son, James, finally uniting the warring nations of England and Scotland under one sovereign. This transition proved that the legacies of royal wives lived on through their descendants. Long after the wedding bells had ceased to ring and the players had left the stage, Mary, Queen of Scots, had navigated a labyrinth of matrimonial alliances that often ended in tragedy. Her marriage to Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, was intended to solidify her claim to the English throne, but instead, it sowed seeds of discord and murder. The shadows of Holyrood Palace whispered of betrayal as Mary found herself caught between her Catholic faith and a Protestant nobility. Her personal choices in marriage became public disasters, illustrating the precarious nature of a queen regnant's heart and the brutal consequences of a union gone wrong in the cold northern winds of 16th-century Scotland. The union of the crowns in 1603 was the delayed harvest of a seed planted a century prior. When Margaret Tudor moved north to marry the King of Scots, she could not have foreseen that her great-grandson would one day sit on her brother's throne. This union was not forged in battle, but through the slow, patient crawl of genealogical descent. James VI and I moved his court to London, bringing with him the heavy weight of Scottish tradition and the intricate dark complexities of a dual kingdom, forever altering the British identity and the geopolitical landscape of the Isles. The arrival of Henrietta Maria of France at the English court signaled a new era of religious tension. As a Catholic princess in a staunchly Protestant nation, her marriage to Charles I was both a romantic bond and a political powder keg. She brought with her the refined Baroque sensibilities of the French court, yet her refusal to participate in the Anglican coronation ceremony alienated her subjects. The courtly masks and grand portraits hid a growing divide, as the Queen became a target for those who feared the influence of a foreign Catholic wife in the heart of power. As the English Civil War loomed, Henrietta Maria's role shifted from a decorative consort to a fierce defender of the royal prerogative. She pawned her crown jewels in the Netherlands to buy arms and ammunition for her husband's cause, embodying the dual nature of the queenly role, both a domestic partner and a wartime strategist. The dark shadows of rebellion stretched across the kingdom, and the Queen was forced to flee into exile, leaving behind a husband who would eventually pay the ultimate price for his vision of kingship and his unwavering loyalty to his controversial marriage. Following the Restoration, the marriage of Catherine of Braganza to Charles II brought the vast Portuguese Empire into the English sphere. Her dowry included Tangier and Bombay, marking the start of Britain's deep involvement in the Indian subcontinent. Though the marriage was plagued by Charles's infidelities and Catherine's inability to produce an heir, her presence solidified the Anglo-Portuguese alliance. The Queen, often isolated by her faith and the lively, secular court, found solace in the quiet rituals of tea drinking, a habit that would eventually become an iconic British tradition, born from a foreign bride's loneliness. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 saw Mary II and her husband, William of Orange, take the throne in a unique joint monarchy. Unlike the queens of the past who ruled alone or as consorts, Mary shared her power by law, yet deferred much of the administration to William. Their marriage was a calculated Protestant alliance designed to check the ambitions of Catholic France. The shifting tides of political thought began to redefine the crown as a constitutional office, where the Queen's role was as much about legal legitimacy as it was about dynastic continuation in a changing world. Under the reign of William and Mary, the concept of the King's Peace expanded to include the stability of the Protestant succession. Mary's personal sacrifice, choosing her husband's cause over her father, James II, became a symbol of the new political order. The palace chambers were filled with the scratch of quills as the Bill of Rights was drafted, limiting the powers of the crown that had been so absolute under the Tudors. This marital partnership laid the groundwork for a modern parliamentary democracy, where the Queen's presence was a bridge between the old absolute monarchy and a new constitutional era. Queen Anne, the last of the Stuarts, oversaw the formal Acts of Union in 1707, merging England and Scotland into Great Britain. Her many pregnancies, though tragic in their outcome, highlighted the immense pressure on a queen to secure the future through her own body. Anne's reign was defined by the transition from a family-run monarchy to a state-run empire. Her marriage to Prince George of Denmark provided personal stability amidst the storm of partisan politics, proving that even a quiet, supportive union could provide the necessary foundation for a nation undergoing seismic political and cultural change. Looking back through the centuries, the evolution of the Queen's role through marriage reflects the broader transformation of European society. From the medieval pawns of territorial expansion to the sovereign architects of global empires, these women utilized the institution of marriage to navigate a world that often sought to exclude them. The parchment scrolls of history are stained with the ink of marriage contracts that redrew maps and shifted faiths. The crown, once a prize of blood and conquest, became a symbol of a nation's soul, guarded and shaped by the strategic unions of its queens. In the mid-16th century, the English throne faced a religious and political crossroads. Queen Mary I, determined to restore the Roman Catholic faith, sought a powerful alliance through marriage. Her choice was Philip II of Spain, a union that promised to align England with the greatest power of the age. However, the prospect of a foreign king consort sparked deep-seated fears among the English nobility. The marriage was not merely a romantic or religious pursuit. It was a calculated attempt to secure a Catholic succession and reintegrate England into the continental fold, forever altering the nation's spiritual landscape. The marriage treaty between Mary and Philip was a masterpiece of legal maneuvering, designed to protect English sovereignty. It strictly limited Philip's power, ensuring he could not lead England into Spanish wars or claim the throne after Mary's death. Despite these safeguards, the union remained unpopular, leading to Wyatt's rebellion. The tension between the Queen's personal conviction and her subjects' xenophobia created a fractured court. Through this marriage, Mary demonstrated that even a queen's heart was a matter of state, where every vow was scrutinized by a populace wary of foreign intervention and the loss of national identity. Upon Mary's death, her half-sister Elizabeth I ascended, inheriting a kingdom scarred by religious strife. Elizabeth understood that marriage was her greatest diplomatic weapon. By remaining the virgin queen, she turned her hand in marriage into a perpetual carrot for the princes of Europe. For decades, she engaged in a high-stakes game of international courtship, using potential matches to keep rivals like France and Spain at bay. Her refusal to marry was a radical political strategy, proving that a queen could maintain power not through a husband, but through the strategic absence of one, redefining the monarchy's future. The most serious of Elizabeth's courtships involved the French Duke of Anjou. To her advisors, it was a dangerous gamble. To Elizabeth, it was a shield against Spanish aggression. The negotiations were long and fraught with public outcry, yet she played the part of the smitten suitor with precision. When the match finally fell through, it was on her terms, leaving her position stronger than before. This era of perpetual engagement showed the world that a queen's marital status was a tool of statecraft as powerful as any army, capable of shifting the balance of power in Europe. While Elizabeth avoided the altar, her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, found her life defined and ultimately destroyed by her marriages. Her union with Lord Darnley was a disaster of ego and violence, while her subsequent marriage to the Earl of Bothwell led to her forced abdication and flight to England. Mary's marital choices were seen as personal failures that had catastrophic political consequences, contrasting sharply with Elizabeth's restraint. The tragic trajectory of Mary's life underscored the peril a queen faced when marriage and passion collided with the cold, hard requirements of sovereign rule in a patriarchal world. The death of Elizabeth I, without an heir, led to the union of the crowns, as James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, became James I of England. This transition was the culmination of generations of dynastic marriages and bloodlines converging. The unification of the two long warring kingdoms was a quiet revolution, achieved not by the sword, but by the slow, deliberate ink of marriage contracts signed years prior. The Stuart era began with the promise of a unified Britain, a legacy of the very marriages that had once caused such turmoil and division. The reign of Charles I brought a new kind of marital tension in the form of Henrietta Maria of France. As a Catholic queen in a Protestant nation, her marriage was viewed with suspicion from the start. Henrietta Maria was no passive consort. She was a fierce advocate for her faith and her husband's divine right to rule. Her influence over Charles was cited by his enemies as a primary cause of the English Civil War. Her marriage became a flashpoint for the ideological struggle between the monarchy and Parliament, proving that a queen's private influence could ignite a national conflagration. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 introduced a unique marital arrangement: the joint sovereignty of Mary II and William III. Unlike previous queen's consort, Mary was a co-monarch, though she often deferred to her husband in military matters. Their marriage was a political necessity, designed to secure a Protestant succession and limit the power of the throne through the Bill of Rights. This union marked the birth of the constitutional monarchy, where the Queen's role was defined by law and partnership rather than absolute authority. Their combined rule reshaped the very foundations of British governance and the concept of royal marriage. Queen Anne, the last Stuart monarch, presided over the Acts of Union in 1707, which formally joined England and Scotland into Great Britain. Her marriage to Prince George of Denmark was a source of personal stability amidst a reign defined by political upheaval and personal loss. Although George held no official power, his presence allowed Anne to navigate the treacherous waters of Whig and Tory politics. The union was the crowning achievement of her reign, a metaphorical marriage of nations that mirrors the strategic unions of her ancestors, solidifying a global power that would dominate the centuries to come. As the 18th century progressed, the role of the queen through marriage began to shift toward a symbol of national morality and domestic stability. The era of the warrior queen or the strategic bride was evolving into something more modern, yet no less influential. The foundations laid by the Tudors and Stuarts, through their alliances, their refusals, and their tragedies, had created a blueprint for the British monarchy. These queens used the institution of marriage to navigate a world of men, ensuring that while the kings might wear the crown, it was often the queens who directed the hand that held the scepter. In 1761, the arrival of Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz marked a new chapter for the British monarchy. Married to George III within hours of her arrival, she represented a shift from purely territorial gain to the cultivation of a stable, moral court. Charlotte was not merely a bride of convenience. She brought with her an intellectual curiosity that would redefine the Queen's role as a patron of the arts and sciences. This transition signaled the end of the meddling consort and the birth of the Queen as a cultural guardian, using the stability of her marriage to anchor the throne during an era of global upheaval and colonial expansion. As Queen Charlotte settled into her life at Kew and Buckingham House, her marriage became a foundation for the Enlightenment within the palace. Unlike the turbulent royal marriages of the past, hers was a partnership of shared interests, particularly in botany and music. By championing figures like Mozart and expanding the Royal Botanic Gardens, Charlotte used her status to foster a national identity rooted in intellectual progress. This period of domestic stability allowed the monarchy to project an image of calm and sophistication, even as the American colonies began to stir with the fires of revolution, proving that a queen's influence could be felt through quiet cultivation rather than loud decree. The strength of Charlotte's marriage was tested as King George III's mental health began to decline. The Queen was forced into a precarious position, navigating the treacherous waters of the Regency crisis while protecting her husband's dignity. She became the gatekeeper of the king's household, a role that required immense political tact and personal resilience. Through her refusal to let the court succumb to factional chaos, Charlotte maintained the integrity of the crown during its darkest hour. Her marriage had evolved into a shield, protecting the institution of monarchy from the internal rot of illness and the external pressures of political rivals who sought to exploit the king's vulnerability. Following the tumultuous years of the Regency, Queen Adelaide, wife of William IV, brought a much-needed sense of sobriety and reform to the palace. Her marriage was a stabilizing force after the excesses of the previous generation. Adelaide was a pioneer of royal charity, using her position to advocate for the poor and influence the king's views on social reform. Though her time on the throne was brief, her commitment to a modest and virtuous lifestyle set the stage for the next great era of the British monarchy. She transformed the role of the Queen Consort into one of moral leadership, bridging the gap between the old world and the new Victorian age. Queen Adelaide's influence was particularly vital in her role as a mentor to the young Princess Victoria. With the king's health failing and the future of the dynasty uncertain, Adelaide ensured that the transition of power would be steady. She used the security of her marriage and her standing at court to protect Victoria from the manipulative Kensington system, orchestrated by the Duchess of Kent and Sir John Conroy. By acting as a stabilizing matriarch, Adelaide proved that the Queen's power often lay in the quiet guidance of the next generation, ensuring the survival of the crown through personal integrity and the careful management of royal lineage. In 1840, the marriage of Queen Victoria to Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha redefined the concept of the British monarchy for the modern world. This was a partnership of equals in intellect and industry, where the Queen's authority was bolstered by the prince's vision for a technological and moral renaissance. Their union moved away from the decadent scandals of the past, presenting instead a model of middle-class domesticity that resonated with a changing nation. Victoria's marriage was not just a personal choice. It was a strategic alignment that brought German intellectualism into the heart of British governance, creating a formidable dual engine of imperial progress and social reform. As the Industrial Revolution transformed the landscape of Britain, Victoria and Albert's marriage became the face of a new, forward-looking empire. Albert's role as the Queen's closest advisor allowed him to spearhead projects like the Great Exhibition of 1851, which showcased British ingenuity to the world. Victoria, in turn, used her position to legitimize Albert's influence, creating a unique governing partnership where the lines between crown and consort blurred. Together, they navigated the challenges of a rapidly changing society, using their marriage to project an image of stability and progress that helped prevent the revolutionary fires sweeping through Europe from taking hold in Britain. The influence of Victoria and Albert's marriage extended far beyond the borders of Britain through their 9 children, who married into almost every royal house in Europe. Victoria became known as the grandmother of Europe, using these marital alliances to weave a complex web of diplomacy across the continent. This was the ultimate realization of the Queen's marriage as a political tool. By placing her descendants on the thrones of Germany, Russia, Spain, and beyond, Victoria sought to maintain a fragile peace through blood ties. Her marriage had created a biological empire, where the stability of Europe rested on the personal relationships of a single extended family. Following Albert's untimely death, Victoria's role as a queen through her marriage took on a more somber, yet equally powerful form. For decades, she remained the widow of Windsor, using her grief as a powerful symbol of national mourning and moral constancy. This period of her reign saw the monarchy transition into a symbol of the state, rather than an active political force. Her influence was felt through the weight of her presence and the standards of morality she imposed on her court and her subjects. Her marriage, even in death, continued to define the Victorian era, proving that a queen's legacy could be forged as much by her loss as by her union. By the end of the 19th century, the role of the queen through marriage had been fundamentally transformed. From the strategic warriors of the medieval era to the moral icons of the Victorian age, these women had used the institution of marriage to shape the destiny of nations. They navigated a world where their power was often indirect, yet their influence was absolute. Whether through the forging of alliances, the management of crises, or the setting of national character, the queens of Britain proved that the crown was not just a symbol of male authority, but a seat of power that was often defined by the women who shared the throne. As the Victorian era waned, the legacy of the Queen Consort had become an inseparable part of the British constitutional fabric. These women were no longer just mothers of heirs. They were the guardians of national morale. Their marriages were the stitches that held the fraying edges of an empire together. The subtle shift from political pawns to diplomatic partners was complete. This transformation ensured that the royal institution survived the turbulent transitions into the modern age. The Queens of Marriage had successfully redefined their purpose, moving from the shadows of the throne to its very center, anchoring the monarchy in a sea of change. Enter Alexandra of Denmark, whose marriage to the future Edward VII was as much a strategic shield as a romantic union. Her presence helped navigate the delicate relationships between the British crown and the emerging powers of Europe. In an age of mounting tensions, her quiet diplomacy and popular appeal provided a much-needed human face to the often austere royal family. She balanced the demands of her Danish heritage with her duties to Britain, illustrating how a consort could act as a bridge between nations, using her position to soften the harsh edges of international politics during a period of immense global anxiety. Mary of Teck brought a sense of unshakable continuity as the world plunged into the chaos of the Great War. Her marriage to George V was a masterclass in stability and duty. She understood that her role was to represent the permanence of the British identity when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Through her meticulously managed public image and her unwavering support for her husband, she helped the monarchy survive the fall of nearly every other major European dynasty. Her legacy was one of resilience, proving that the strength of a queen's marriage could provide the foundation for a nation's survival during total war. Behind the closed doors of the palace, these queens faced the heavy burden of their titles. The marriage was not just a personal bond, but a public contract that demanded the sacrifice of individual will for the greater good of the crown. We see them in their private quarters, surrounded by the weight of history, reading the secret dispatches that would determine the fate of millions. Their influence was often whispered, a subtle guidance offered in the quiet moments between state ceremonies. These women were the silent architects of the modern British state, their marriages serving as the scaffolding for centuries of political evolution. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the Queen Mother, redefined the role once more during the darkest days of the 20th century. Her marriage to George VI was a partnership forged in the fires of crisis. As they stood together amidst the ruins of a bombed London, she became the symbol of a nation that refused to break. Her refusal to leave her husband's side or flee the capital turned her marriage into a powerful weapon of psychological warfare. She demonstrated that a queen consort's most vital contribution could be her presence, turning the concept of royal marriage into a beacon of national unity and hope during a global struggle. Looking back through the long corridor of time, the thread of influence remains clear. From the medieval queens who brought lands and armies, to the modern queens who brought stability and morale, the institution of marriage has been the engine of British history. Each woman adapted the role to the needs of her era, navigating the constraints of her gender and her station to leave an indelible mark. They were the stabilizers, the diplomats, and the visionaries who ensured that the crown remained relevant. Their stories are a testament to the fact that power is not always found in the scepter, but in the hand that guides it. The diplomatic power of these marriages often manifested in the smallest details. A letter sent to a foreign cousin, a quiet word during a state dinner, or a subtle change in court protocol. These actions, while invisible to the public, shifted the course of international relations. The queens utilized their familial networks across Europe to prevent conflicts and foster alliances that kings alone could not achieve. Their marriages were the ultimate exercise in soft power, proving that the personal is always political. They were the invisible threads in the tapestry of European peace, woven carefully through years of marital duty and strategic foresight. As we reach the conclusion of this historical journey, we see that the identity of Britain itself was forged through these unions. The very language, the laws, and the cultural landscape of the nation were shaped by the foreign traditions and intellects these queens brought with them. Their marriages were not just endings to diplomatic negotiations, but the beginnings of new cultural syntheses. They brought the Renaissance to the court, introduced new philosophies, and championed the arts, ensuring that the British crown was a center of enlightenment as well as a center of power. The marriage was the medium through which history moved. The crown, therefore, is not a solitary object, but a dual entity, defined as much by the consort as by the monarch. The history of Britain is a history of these partnerships, where the strength of the union determined the strength of the state. These women accepted the challenges of their roles with a gravity that resonates through the centuries. They understood that their marriages were the foundation upon which the future was built. By examining their lives, we uncover a hidden history of leadership and influence that transcends the traditional narratives of kings and battles, revealing the true power of the queen through marriage. In the final analysis, the queens of Britain through marriage were more than just partners. They were the essential architects of a nation's destiny. From the rugged halls of the medieval period to the polished courts of the modern era, they wielded influence with grace, intelligence, and a profound sense of duty. Their legacy remains etched in the stones of the palaces they inhabited and the laws of the land they helped govern. As the curtain falls on this exploration, we are left with the image of a crown that is forever shared, a testament to the enduring power of the women who changed history through the sacred bond of marriage.